After the war, the college and high school joined together for the first time, and we rented Trout Creek Camp for 2 Christmas seasons.
We went to Trout Creek as young people, but we were a small group.
And we enjoyed it so much that then the assemblies rented the beach thing for a couple of years, and with that they knew we needed a camp of our own.
There had been some talk among the assemblies about having a camp after our experience down at Cannon Beach.
And so it was decided then we should have a camp of our own.
There was a piece of property that was floated that was offered for use up in the Welch's area, I believe. And I think even there was some consideration given to a property that Dr. Albert Hunt owned, which was on the south side of the Clackamas River in Estacada.
Otto, in his quietness, after all the things, says, "Well, I have some property you might be interested in." So typical of Otto and his graciousness.
Finally, Dad came up with a proposal that he would offer to let the assemblies use the 10 acres, and he would supply the materials for a building and cabins.
I went out with a group of young people and some of the men that were from the assemblies to kind of consider the property of Mr. Jansen's, and I remember that.
And so the assemblies took him up on it, and we began building in July of 1952, and had our first camp a year later.
We started in June of '52, if I remember right, and finished in '53.
I think they began with about 8 cabins, I think, something like that. They added another 1 or 2 later. They were very simple in construction, just with a crowned roof and tar paper and full of holes, drafty.
I was working for a contractor at the time, and I told him what we were planning on doing. He says, "Well, you know what you want." He said, "Somebody in your congregation can do it." So I just went ahead and did it.
Ted Jenkins oversaw the construction, and this was all on a volunteer basis. I don't think he was paid anything that I recall, and no one was paid. But it was mostly weekend, Saturday work during the year, but we had big work crews, and a lot was accomplished.
And right up until like 6 o'clock in the morning, older people that are gone to heaven now, like Dave Mason, Mac Walker, Merle Smith, these guys were out there plumbing for those 2 bathrooms to open camp, Gilbert Knutson, right through the night to be ready for camp that first day.
I didn't know I would have to guarantee my work for 50 years. Here you do it for a few months and hope they don't catch up with you sometime.
To have a camp at all, it demanded the assemblies getting together, raising the money, and then the donations of land and other things. And I just think of the input of the Jansen family. It embarrassed them, but the well drilling, the road grading, the leveling of the field for years, dragging things to get rid of the rock. Always, mostly when we weren't even around, we just saw the tractors and the graders out there. It was exciting to see.
A fellow with a portable sawmill talked to Dad and asked him if he had any timber he wanted cut, sawed up. And so this man, I forget his name now, anyway, he set up on the 80 acres across the creek, and he sawed practically all the lumber for the camp.
Building the camp that year was beyond any conferences or anything we'd had in the past for Unity. There was nothing like the working together, working hard and raising the monies, and people finding things they could do, simple people. It hadn't been what you'd call leadership. Andy Schroth going to the surplus sales. We laughed at the stuff he got us stuck with that we couldn't get rid of, but he found us kitchen equipment and these things that we could not have had a camp without guys like Andy. And those that took those crummy old trailers behind the cars and brought the grocery out, Larry Justice, Jack Clark, Walt Justice, Dave Campbell.
The first director the first year was Bob Elliott and my dad.
They're the only ones that had ever been to a camp as far as we knew.
Yeah.
Bob Elliott has spoken as a speaker the year before in Turner, And Mary's dad in Minneapolis was used a lot. The rest of us, other than the rental at Trout Creek, had never really been to a camp. So we started out needing counselors, cooks, directors, everything.
I think that it went beyond anyone's imagination as to what the result would be. In fact, I remember the first camp. I was one of the counselors, and I was absolutely flabbergasted that people were getting saved. The kids, you know, were wanting to talk to the speaker, who was Mr. Purcell, and I'd never seen anything like that. It was amazing.
In 1966, on a Wednesday night, which was a prayer meeting night at our house, I got a call from Jack Jensen, and he said the building is up in flames. And of course, you know, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And I said, well, I was out there today.
The very day of the fire, I went out. I was out there in the morning and checked things and saw that the locks were locked and so on the basement and the upper part. We had a padlock on the basement doors. The fire started sometime in late afternoon, I believe, is when it was reported.
I remember sitting in the prayer meeting at Eastgate in the fireside room, and a phone call came. It must have been around 9 o'clock because it was prayer meeting time.
I thought it was at home late, but it was prayer meeting.
No, it was a prayer meeting where I was, at least, and they phoned that the camp was on fire. We whistled out of there, got out the fire trucks. The building was pretty much gone. It went quick because it was just nice dry fur.
The base of the old building, instead of it being like an ocean, the building was gone, but the yellow of what was moving back and forth was the remains of what was left of the old building. In fact, all that was standing was a chimney on the far end, and those two washrooms were scorched bad. They had to be torn down, of course.
And the firemen left about midnight and left us there about 4. I think it was Darwin Kirchen and me, and I don't know who else, but we stood there all night until daylight in the morning with fire hoses trying to quell everything, but the firemen went back. But I think there was as much water out of our eyes as there was out of the hoses to stand there and see what had been so much a part of us. It was just so hard.
Yeah, we went out the next morning. Ted Jenkins called me and told me the lodge had burned down. And so I called her and said, you know, we need to go out. And so we went out the next morning.
Yeah. We were engaged at the time.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of really fond memories of that lodge, you know, youth retreats and high school camp, and it was a real special place.
The door that I had double checked and was locked was lying face down, outside side down. It burned around it or had collapsed or something. And I picked it up and lifted it, and here the padlock was open. So someone had broken in there and set the fire in some of the lower part in the basement of the building.
Then an arson inspector came to my house, and he talked to me and asked about Otto Jensen, if he had any ill feelings about it. We had some insurance on it, and I said, he never did and never would. I said, you don't talk like that about that man.
They figured it was arson.
Yeah, there was a young man admitted to it from someplace. He didn't identify himself, but he was in a hospital somewhere, and guilt got to him, and they said there's no way to pursue it, and it was just as well because the insurance had all been settled.
Strangely enough, I was working on a job with a very godly man, and he was talking about his son. And he said, I don't know what it's going to take to bring him to Christ. But he said, he was in a hospital too one time. He got burnt bad. And then I began to listen. He wrote a letter to camp, and I gave it to Jack Jensen, and we communicated back and forth in the newspaper. And he wanted to know if God would forgive him. From what I heard, he got saved. So ended well, but he paid the price for what he did at camp. He went back to camp earlier, like I was telling you, and he was liquored up, and that's what he did. He didn't have any grudge against camp that I know of, but he just set fire to it.
You know, how could they, just as an act of wanton violence and foolishness, you know, destroy something that meant so much? Even in the act of doing that, camp touched his life in a way, in a really strange way, but you know, touched his life, and God reached him. You know, if it took the destruction of the lodge to reach one person, it was worth it.
The fire came along with all its disaster. It was a godsend, shall I say, and that before all we had was from 3 to 5 weeks in the summer. That's the only time those buildings could be used. There was no way to heat them. They were board and bat, no insulation, not even any sheetrock, just 1-inch boards to the outside. And so when camp was over, it was done. After the fire, and they rebuilt from, I think the fire was in October, and by June, we were ready for camp.
Ted Jenkins again was in charge, and this time we knew we couldn't build it in the required time because we didn't get started till probably December, something like that. And so Ted was hired, and I think also Darwin Kersham.
It was a blessing in disguise because instead of having a building that was only good for summer, then we got a building that was good for all the year. And I can remember some people who used to rent it, they called me up and asked me if it would be ready. Well, I said, it'll be ready. To what extent, I don't know for sure. But some of those Saturdays, I had as many as 60 men out there.
And we were able to get it ready for the camp, and it was a tremendous improvement. It was a real boost in a way that it burned. It was a shock. So the Lord turned what was, like Joseph said to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
All of a sudden we had a camp that could be used year-round, and if God blessed in 5 weeks, now he can work 12 months of the year through rentals and retreats. Thousands and thousands of kids from other churches and non-churches reached.
Camp couldn't have gone where it's gone with the old lodge. And I don't think anyone would have suggested tearing it down, you know?
Yeah. He does more abundantly than we can ask or imagine. Northwest Passage was an opportunity for young men to get together with a group of adolescent guys, and they actually lived at camp for 3 weeks and did work projects, lived up on the hill. In fact, they built the building that was now called Northwest Passage, and they showered, and everything was up there, meals, shower, everything. And then the last week they did a backpack trip, and that became the then Wilderness Week program, and the rest of Northwest Passage became TCL, or STAR, where kids began staying out at camp for the summer and serving in various ways. So it's, in a sense, it's still going, it's just undergone a sort of transformation.
Wilderness Week was a real opportunity to spend a whole week out camping, being outdoors, watching the stars, suffering with whatever kind of weather came along, and just a real time to establish relationships with a small group of people, and also the opportunity to kind of push yourself physically, to know whether or not you could do what was required, and whether you could walk beside other people who might be struggling with the same things you're trying to do. So, opportunity to encourage and accept encouragement.
That was really an important program for me, and was the kind of activity that I just love to do, and to be able to combine a sense of spiritual leadership with the physical challenges was really an important part of not only reaching other people, but reaching me as well.
A lot of us with not much gift have found a place to serve and to help kids come to Christ and to promote fellowship with Christians. Most of the camp people are rather ordinary people that enjoy the Lord, enjoy the Scriptures.
We feel the opportunity to serve in that contribution to camp because of the atmosphere that's there. Take people out of their real world and put them in a world that's different they're not used to.
You're serving Christ. It's what it's all, I mean, it's what we're here for. We have a purpose here in life, and to give our lives to Christ and to serve and to give our time to see others come to Christ is, I believe, is basically being a Christian, is what it's all about.
To find out, because you love the Lord Jesus and you believe the Scriptures, you know He can use you, so you just pack up thinking, even though I can't do it, you go and you find God does use you. And to have a child or a parent thank you, either then or years later, just at the garage sale yesterday, somebody said something to me, a kid I had years ago, and I thought, oh boy, I wouldn't have thought that, you know. So I think that is it, to be used, not only encouraging kids and everything else, but think that some of them are going to heaven that would not have.
There's something about doing something because you feel called to do it, and you're not doing it because there's a paycheck involved. It's for another set of reasons. There's a sense of God's pleasure in what you're doing.
It transforms the life of the workers themselves to find out they can go to be used, and you're exhausted at the end of a week, no matter what area you're working in. As a nurse, where you're all day long have little girls particularly coming and needing this and that, and needing really to visit with a nurse, or whether it's, so there's not a whole lot of sleep, but you can go home at the end of the week and think, this was a worthwhile week, and there's some kids going to heaven, and there's some Christian kids that have gotten their feet on the ground, that life is not all play.
I was thinking also that there's a sense of adventure and vulnerability to go out there and trust God to use you in a way that is out of your comfort zone. And it seems like God really honors that.
Counselors are dedicated. They know they're there for a reason. That is to show them who Jesus Christ really is and to act it out in their lives and to work with them so closely. I mean, you're with them 24 hours a day. And that's a real opportunity for the counselors, both the senior and the junior counselors, to see what Christ can do in a kid's life and show them. And also it builds them up too.
At Eagle Fern, you just impact one person. I don't care if it's in 10 years for Christ. You've done what you're being asked to do. So I think you don't have to be a big leader. I think you just have to have a serving heart and step out. If you step out, He will bless you. It doesn't matter. I always tell the kids at youth group and at Eagle Fern, if you to get involved, step out. Step out of your comfort zone, step out, and He will use you. He will bless that. Doesn't matter what it is. You just get involved in serving. You can't go wrong. There's no wrong way if you just give your life to Him, step out, and ask Him to use you in some manner.
I think to me it's just the thrill of seeing young lives changed at camp. In any role that you're in, you're a part of that, so that it was just so much encouragement to see young lives come to you and ask for help, and you'd sit out on the deck and talk to them, or we'd sit in a cabin if you had that and maybe get into the bunk with them and talk with them. It was just seeing the impact that the spirit that was out at camp that the Lord could use. So, and the fun of it. It wasn't just heavy stuff. It was the fun of coming to camp too, and working together with friends and enjoying each other while you were out there. So it wasn't hard to go to camp. It was hard at the end of the week sometimes, but it was a great experience to be part of that.
It is a known fact that the younger the child is, or most people come to the Lord when they're younger age, and that's why I think we love this camp.
This could be probably some of the kids in their lives the most positive thing that happens to them, because they might not have the best home life. This week they get absolutely doted on
knowing that there's something else we can do to bring Jesus Christ into people's lives is important for us and a lot of people. And it's not just the counselors and directors, it's the cooks, it's the staff, it's in the church to support it. It is an expense to the churches, but there is a value because it is a missionary field that we get to touch in a local area. We cannot touch any other way.
We're in the business of lost souls and young lost souls for Christ. And I think anytime we can impact young kids and in a positive way, and the most important decision they'll ever make, I think it's important.
The early years of camp, a large proportion of the kids at camp were invited and paid for by Christians. People they worked with, neighbor kids. It's not happening. And it seems like camp's a lot of money, but $7 was a lot of money. $15 was a lot of money. So $200 proportionally is still not grown. We had to spend a lot more nowadays on insurance and things like that. But we need to see the value of $200 compared to any other way we spend it in Christian service. Of all the things we go through for productive, to send a kid by choice whose parent worked with you or in your neighborhood, and we've got to get back to that.
It's his creation, it's his work. We're just privileged to be part of it, small parts, because it's what he does in the human heart that's significant.
Anybody can serve at camp. Even if they can't be there in body, they can pray, and then if they have some funds they can afford to give, then they do. But we've had all kinds of men and women of different status. Some were millionaires, some were like some of us, but we have a rich Father, and putting it all together has been a tremendous experience.
Eternal work, hard work, and fun all mixed together. And if we could keep that sense of balance in our Christian work, even in our churches and our assemblies, where anybody that's not a Christian come in and have a good day and still find that God is working there and that God is real and that He's the one that's joined us all together.
Yeah.
Unity, and that's, if any word applies to camp, unity has to be.
Yeah.
Fellowship and unity.
I had no idea when we were beginning camp it was going to turn out like this. I didn't know what camp was. And like I mentioned earlier, I was flabbergasted when the boys and girls were trusting the Lord right out in the middle of camp, you know. It's the Lord's work. It's what He has accomplished. And in that sense, I take no pride in it. I am thankful for what the Lord has done and hopeful for the future and praying that the future will be equally bright.